She was just a modest farm girl, tending to chickens and milking cows under the vast Wyoming sky. Yet in a single fateful moment, Clara May Dawson's life transformed into a legend no one in Sweetwater County would ever forget. Under the flickering lantern light, she found a gravely wounded Cheyenne warrior on her family's property. Without hesitation, Clara May chose compassion over fear, nursing the stranger back from the brink of death. Little did she know that act of kindness would spark a chain of events involving outlaws, soldiers, and a tribe's solemn promise, culminating in an unforgettable dawn of honor. The Dawson farm sat perched on a grassy plain near a bend in the Sweetwater River, an unassuming patch of cultivated land, caught between the rolling hills and the wide-open sky. For 17 years, Clara May Dawson knew only this small slice of frontier living. Her father, Samuel Dawson, a stout man with calloused hands and a heart bigger than the prairies themselves, had come to Wyoming from Pennsylvania, seeking land for himself and his young wife, Lucy. They built their log and mortar home piece by piece, sustaining themselves with a humble array of crops and livestock. By the time Clara May was old enough to run in the fields, the territory had changed. Stagecoaches rattled over new roads. The cavalry kept a watchful eye from nearby Fort Laramie. Wagons loaded with settlers trundled west, each searching for fortune or freedom. In the swirl of that progress, new tensions arose between the Cheyenne, the Lakota, and incoming homesteaders. The Dawsons tried to remain neutral, forging peaceful relationships whenever possible, though rumors of raids and conflicts were never far away. Clara May wasn't a stranger to the presence of the native tribes. Occasionally she saw glimpses of riders silhouetted against the rising sun, or found footprints near the river's edge. But no trouble had ever come directly to their home. Samuel Dawson made it clear they would always show respect to the land's original inhabitants. He taught Clara the importance of living in harmony, warning her that fear bred violence on both sides. Through the seasons, Mother Lucy's influence balanced his. She was the calm presence at home, ensuring that love and warmth filled the walls despite the surrounding uncertainties. Then one brisk autumn evening, when the fields lay golden in the fading light and a cold wind whispered over the plains, everything changed. Alone in the barn, Clara May stoked the lantern's flame, carefully brushing down their old mare Ladybird. That's when she heard a muffled groan, a gasp for air coming from outside in the tall grass. At first, she thought it must be an injured animal. But as she ventured out, her heart pounding with every step she came upon, a terrible sight. A Cheyenne man, torn by bullet wounds, barely conscious. He was dressed in traditional buckskin breeches, the beaded vest stained with blood. An eagle feather was tangled in his long, dark hair. Struck by his injuries, Clara May knelt beside him, tears threatening to blur her vision. Every cautionary tale she had ever heard echoed through her mind, stories of feuds of vengeance and of unstoppable conflict. Yet in that very moment, empathy won over fear. That night, she dragged his limp body into the barn, hidden from plain view. Every muscle in her back screamed in protest, but adrenaline and determination spurred her on. She laid him on a bed of straw beside Ladybird's stall, fetching water and strips of clean cloth. By lantern light, the warm glow dancing across her freckled cheeks, Clara May began to clean and dress the wounds the best she could. Her eyes darted to the barn door, half expecting armed men to burst in at any moment, accusing her of harboring a dangerous foe. As she worked, the man would groan in pain, drifting in and out of consciousness. She offered gentle words he likely couldn't understand. Though fear weighed heavy in her heart, she recognized something deeper in this stranger's eyes, a profound gratitude, even in the haze of agony. If she told her father right away, what would happen? Samuel Dawson was a kind soul, but practical he might fear for the farm's safety and demand the man be turned away, or possibly turned over to Fort Laramie's soldiers. Yet leaving this man to die would surely crush Clara May's own sense of right and wrong. Determined to do the only thing she believed was morally correct, Clara May continued her midnight vigil. Eventually, she slipped out of the barn to fetch more supplies, an extra quilt, some hot water. She'd keep this secret until morning at least. By then, perhaps she'd find the words to convince her parents that saving this man was the only humane choice. Morning dawned clear and crisp. Samuel and Lucy Dawson discovered Clara May's secret soon enough when they heard her hushed voice whispering in the barn. At first, Samuel's expression hardened in worry. His daughter was risking the entire family's safety by nursing a wounded Cheyenne warrior. War drums, rumors of raids. The entire region braced for violence, especially after a recent attack on a wagon train near the Bozeman Trail. Even the name Cheyenne struck fear in many settlers' hearts. But Lucy quickly saw the seriousness of the man's injuries and recognized the compassion that had driven Clara May's choice. While Lucy helped redress the wounds, Samuel stepped outside, scanning the horizon for any sign of riders. The man's presence could spark trouble if discovered by the wrong people. After a moment's tense deliberation, they agreed to keep him hidden until he recovered enough to travel or communicate. The nearest doctor resided in Casper, a day's ride to the northwest, but bringing the warrior to town risked too much both for him and the family. Clara May sat by the stranger's side, feeding him spoonfuls of warm broth. She learned that his name was Tar, meaning shadow hawk, in his tongue, though she only understood when he whispered it repeatedly in delirium. Over the following days, Shadowhawk's condition improved slowly. He still couldn't walk without help, and they had to be cautious with his chest wound, but color gradually returned to his cheeks. He would murmur words in Cheyenne, trying to convey something, but the language barrier was daunting. One late afternoon, while Lucy changed the bandages, Shadowhawk pointed to the horizon. With a serious look in his eyes, he uttered a single word that sounded like Ainova, gesturing again toward the rising sun. Clara May guessed he might be referring to his people. Perhaps he needed to return to them. The worry that more Cheyenne might come searching weighed on the entire Dawson household. Meanwhile, to calm her husband's anxieties, Lucy reminded Samuel of his old friend Colonel Henry Inman, who had been stationed for a time at Fort Laramie. Colonel Inman was known for his attempts at peaceful relations with local tribes. Lucy suggested that if pressed, maybe they could confide in him. Though no longer an active commanding officer, Inman had contacts who could mediate. But for now, secrecy remained their best choice. In the small household, tensions brewed like storm clouds. Samuel grew increasingly concerned about the ramifications if word got out. He also worried about feeding an extra mouth when their harvest was only marginally successful that year. Yet every time he looked at Clara May's face, bright with hope and determination, he knew they'd made the right decision to save this man. Some nights Lucy found him in the yard, staring at the wide-open plains, worry carving deep lines across his weathered face. It was during one of these tense evenings that Shadowhawk's significance became clearer. Inside the barn, where they'd fashioned a makeshift bed, Clara May found him awake, feverish, yet remarkably lucid. He gestured for her to come closer, pressing a hand over the wound at his side, wincing in pain. Then he pointed to himself and said, "O cox ho he." Cheyenne. He paused, meeting Clara May's anxious gaze. Next, he slowly, painstakingly drew a series of lines in the dirt with a stick circle's shapes that might depict a campsite, and then 3 distinct lines for rivers. He tapped the final mark, the biggest circle, and repeated Maheoo, a word Clara May did not understand. His expression, however, conveyed urgency, almost desperation. In those stifled moments under the aroma of straw and old saddle leather, Clara May discerned that he needed to return home. His tribe or family might be expecting him. Perhaps they believed him dead. If he was an important figure, a war leader, a scout, or a messenger, his absence could fuel conflict or misunderstandings. The more he tried to explain, the more she realized the magnitude of the situation. As the pink hues of dusk filtered through the barn's rafters, Clara May vowed to help no matter the risk. A week passed. Shadowhawk's wounds began healing well, thanks to Lucy's careful nursing and Clara May's constant attention. Each morning, Samuel quietly checked the horizon, dreading the possibility that soldiers or vigilantes might come hunting for stray warriors. Rumor had it that Colonel Alfred L. Burt, a real name that the Dawsons recognized from the region, was leading patrols aimed at containing the Cheyenne and Lakota presence along the Oregon and Bozeman trails. The Dawson farm, though remote, was still in the line of potential crossfire. Then on an early, dew-laden morning, the unwelcome knock came at the front door. Clara May, stirring a pot of oats, froze at the sharp raps on the wooden frame. With a glance from Lucy, she hurried to hide in the barn with Shadowhawk just in case. Samuel opened the door to find 2 cavalry soldiers. Their dusty uniforms and hardened faces told of long patrols. One was Sergeant Alan Price, a name Lucy recognized from the Casper garrison. Price was accompanied by Private Liam O'Connell, a green recruit who looked exhausted, as though the rigors of frontier life had quickly stolen the youth from his face. Sergeant Price offered a stiff greeting. "Morning, Mr. Dawson," he said, scanning the yard. "We're checking the area for any sign of fugitives. There's been a report of a Cheyenne warrior spotted along the Sweetwater River. We suspect he might be injured. Have you seen anything unusual?" Fear rippled across Samuel's expression, but he quickly masked it with annoyance. "We keep to ourselves, Sergeant," he replied, leaning against the doorframe in a casual pose. "No strangers here. Just me and my wife and my daughter, who's away visiting cousins near Independence Rock." Lucy stood quietly behind him, her hands balled in her apron. She tried to steady her breathing. If the soldiers asked to look inside the barn, there might be no escape. Sergeant Price's gaze roamed over the homestead. "We might have to conduct a quick search. Orders from Colonel Burt himself." Samuel's voice grew stern. "Now hold on there, Sergeant. We're loyal settlers, not rebels or outlaws. Last I checked, this is private property. You got a warrant or some official paper?" Private O'Connell looked uncomfortable, as though he didn't relish searching a peaceful farm. Still, Sergeant Price pressed on. "We're under direct orders to find this savage before he causes trouble. Could be dangerous. I'm sure you understand." At the mention of the word savage, Lucy's cheeks reddened. She forced herself to stay silent, recalling that any argument might raise suspicion. Finally, Price nodded to O'Connell, and they stepped off the porch, eyeing the barn. Samuel's pulse quickened, but he casually followed them outside, wanting to stay between the troopers and the barn door. "You won't find any hostiles here," he insisted. "How long you 2 been in the saddle?" "You look half dead. We can offer you some water and maybe some biscuits if it'll help you on your way." The prospect of refreshment seemed to momentarily distract them. O'Connell rubbed his parched lips, while Price cast another wary glance around. "All right," he relented. "Could use some water." Lucy hurried to fill canteens from the well, her heart thudding so loudly she thought it must be audible. As the soldiers sipped the water, Samuel stayed in conversation with them, repeating that they'd seen no one, that things were peaceful. Eventually, Price seemed satisfied, though he gave one last lingering look toward the barn. "If you see or hear anything, he warned you'd best report it, Mr. Dawson." Samuel nodded solemnly, half bowing to show respect but not deference. "We'll do our civic duty." Within minutes, the soldiers mounted their tired horses and rode off, stirring up a cloud of dust behind them. Only when they disappeared beyond the hills did Clara May emerge, leading a still limping Shadowhawk by the shoulder. Lucy pressed a hand over her thudding heart. Shadowhawk's eyes showed relief, though a flicker of concern remained. He was still not safe, and he knew it. With the near discovery by soldiers, the Dawsons faced a pivotal decision. They could try to smuggle Shadowhawk to safety. They could wait for him to fully recover and risk further visits from patrols. Or they could send word to Colonel Henry Inman at Fort Laramie, hoping he might broker a peaceful arrangement. After much deliberation, they decided to help Shadowhawk get back to his people, assuming they could track them. Clara May recalled the marks he'd drawn in the dirt, pointing to a region further south near the forks of the Platte River. With some basic supplies and caution, perhaps the young farm girl could guide him there. She was light on her feet, a skilled rider, and she knew the land well enough to avoid the main roads. Lucy insisted, though, that Samuel accompany her. But Sam worried that as a middle-aged man less nimble, he'd slow them down or draw attention. Clara May, on the other hand, could pass quietly, and people might not suspect a mere girl traveling alone with a battered horse if they avoided major thoroughfares. It was a precarious plan, but time was running out. The real threat of Colonel Burt's patrols hung heavy over the farm. That night, by the warm glow of the fireplace, they laid out tanned hide maps pointing out possible routes. Lucy prepared dried biscuits and jerky, while Samuel pressed spare bullets into Clara May's palm, a small single-shot pistol his father's relic from the Civil War era. He insisted she take it for protection. Shadowhawk, despite his limited English, understood they intended to help him return. He clasped Clara May's hand, murmuring a soft phrase she didn't recognize, but she felt it like a blessing. The next morning before dawn, father and daughter loaded up a small wagon with a canvas tarp, food and water. Their hope was that, if spotted, it might look like Clara May was simply hauling goods to a nearby settlement. Shadowhawk would lie hidden beneath the tarp. After crossing the river, Samuel would return while Clara May continued. Though no one said aloud what might happen if trouble found her on the open plains. As the old mule started down the rough trail, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. Lucy stood on the porch, tears brimming in her eyes. She prayed silently for their safety. She also hoped they weren't making a grave mistake. For most of that day, the wagon bumped and rattled across uneven trails, avoiding main roads whenever possible. Clara May kept an eye on the horizon, scanning for dust clouds that might signal approaching riders. She occasionally slowed the wagon to check on Shadowhawk, hidden under the tarp, making sure he had enough air and water. His wound pained him, evident in his gritted teeth whenever they hit a rut. Mid-afternoon, they reached a rock outcropping near the Sweetwater's banks. Samuel decided to part ways there, worried that any further travel together might raise suspicions if cavalry scouted the area. He embraced Clara May, pressing the small pistol into her hand again. "Use it if you have to," he said, his voice tight with worry. "But only if it's life or death, you hear." Clara May nodded, tears prickling her eyes. She could see the mixture of pride and fear in her father's face. "I'll be careful," she promised, "and I'll come home as soon as possible." They parted ways under a sky streaked with pink and gold. Clara May continued alone, heading into the wild terrain. Soon she found a narrow ravine that followed the river southward. She prodded the old mule to pick its way carefully through the rocky defile. Here the walls rose on either side, offering some concealment. Her senses sharpened, listening to the muffled thump of the mule's hooves, the distant rush of the river, and the cry of hawks overhead. Late that day, Clara May spotted a trio of riders emerging from a nearby ridge. She quickly halted the wagon and signaled Shadowhawk to remain still. The riders were too far away to see details, but she realized they weren't wearing cavalry blue. Likely outlaws or roving opportunists. Heart-pounding, she eased the wagon behind a cluster of boulders, praying they wouldn't draw near. The men lingered on the ridge for a moment, scanning the land, before turning and riding west at a gallop. Only after they were gone did Clara May exhale the breath she'd been holding. Eventually, she found a patch of cottonwoods near the water to make camp for the night. She helped Shadowhawk out of the wagon, letting him stretch his stiff limbs. He moved slowly, a grimace etched into his features from the pain of his healing wounds. Clara May prepared a small fire, just enough to cook some beans and keep warm in the chilly evening air. She worried that the light might draw attention, but Shadowhawk pointed to the sky and shook his head, indicating it was safe. No patrol would likely stumble upon them here, not with the night so calm. After they ate, she tended his bandages as best she could. With gestures and halting words, she learned a few more Cheyenne terms. Shadowhawk said Nea Esha, which sounded like gratitude, and He'evoeste, which she guessed meant pain or hurt, as he clutched his wound. In return, she taught him a few English words, shiver horse wagon. Despite the language barrier, a deeper understanding passed between them, born from shared danger and her unwavering compassion. That night, the stars shone in countless numbers overhead, painting the sky with cosmic brilliance. Clara May lay on a rolled blanket, the pistol tucked close for safety. She thought of her parents, of her father's worried face, and of her mother's prayers. She also wondered about Shadowhawk's people, how they would greet her once she brought him home if she succeeded. Before sleep claimed her, she felt a sudden surge of pride. For once, she wasn't just a farm girl stuck in a quiet life. She was forging her own path, guided by courage and kindness. Day 2 of her solitary journey brought new obstacles. The narrow ravine opened up into a broad, wind-swept plain, dotted with sagebrush and scattered rock formations. To her dismay, a group of horsemen appeared just after midday, galloping across her path. Clara May recognized the glint of firearms and tried to steer the wagon away, but it was too late. One of the men waved an arm, beckoning for her to stop. She swallowed hard and complied, reining in the mule. From behind, she heard Shadowhawk shift under the tarp, likely prepared to fight if necessary. But if gunfire broke out, they had little chance. A rugged-looking man approached, a revolver holstered at his hip and a bandolier slung across his chest. "Ma'am," he drawled, tipping a battered hat. "You alone out here?" She nodded, summoning her courage. "Yes, sir. My pa asked me to deliver supplies to a trading post near the Platte." A simple, hopefully believable lie. The man cast a glance at the wagon bed. "Trading post, eh? That's quite a drive for a girl by herself." Clara May tried to keep her tone steady. "I manage fine. Pa's too busy at the farm to spare the time." Another rider circled around, suspicious eyes, scanning the tarp. "What you got back there?" Her pulse pounded in her ears. She forced a smile. Feed sacks, mostly. Some salted meat. For trade, you know. The men exchanged glances. They might be outlaws or renegade scouts or bounty hunters, she couldn't be sure. The group counted 5 in total, and each had a hardened edge to their demeanor. The first man squinted at her. We heard rumor there's a wounded redskin around these parts. Cavalry's offering a reward. You seen anything suspicious? Her breath caught in her throat. If she lied poorly, they'd search the wagon. Mustering her acting skills, she frowned. A wounded Indian? No, sir. Haven't seen a soul all day. Besides you. Fine gentleman. One of the outlaws spat into the dust. Ain't that a shame? We'd love to collect that bounty. A tense silence followed. Slowly, the leader of the group nodded. All right then, miss. Safe travels. Hope you find that trading post. They trotted off, leaving a swirl of dust in their wake. Clara May watched them go, her heart beating like a drum. Only when she was certain they wouldn't return did she urge the mule forward again, offering a trembling smile of relief in Shadowhawk's direction. They'd narrowly avoided disaster. By late afternoon, Clara May decided to rest near a shallow bend in the river. The wagon wheels splashed across the water as she aimed for a strand of cottonwoods on the far side. Safely beneath the canopy of leaves, she cut the mule loose to graze. Shadowhawk emerged from under the tarp, leaning against the wagon's frame, face etched with pain. His bandages were soaked with sweat, and she worried about infection. She dug into their dwindling medical supplies. She had only a small stash of herbs Lucy had prepared for antiseptic. Hold still, she murmured, patting his arm as she gently lifted the bandage. He winced, but didn't protest. I must go home, he rasped in halting English, a testament to his determination to communicate. She nodded. Soon she assured him, We'll keep going. Before she could finish rewrapping the wound, the crunch of footsteps over dried leaves startled them both. Clara May spun around, hand darting for the pistol. Emerging from the shadows was an older man, with a wiry frame, dressed in tattered clothes and a wide-brimmed hat. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace. Whoa now, little lady, he said, voice gravelly yet calm. I ain't here to start trouble. Name's Cletus Garner. I've been trapping and prospecting around these parts for near 30 years. Clara May kept the pistol hidden at her side. You alone? She asked, eyes scanning behind him. Cletus nodded. Are you? Just me and the forest creatures. Smelled your fire, figured I'd see who was about. He noticed Shadowhawk eyes flickering in recognition of a native warrior. Looks like he's in a bad way. Need any help? She hesitated. Could she trust this stranger? He didn't wear a uniform, nor did he look like a bounty hunter. He had a grizzled, sunburnt face that suggested a life of honest, if rough, labor. Sensing her uncertainty, Cletus slowly lowered his hands and spoke softly. I done lived among the Cheyenne some winters ago, trading furs. They treated me decent. I can help you with them wounds if you want. Shadowhawk, despite not fully understanding English, seemed to recognize kindness in the man's tone. He lifted his chin in cautious acceptance. Clara May weighed the risks. If Cletus had ill intent, he could have ambushed them. Instead, he came peacefully offering aid. She decided to take a chance. All right, she agreed, stepping aside. We're just trying to get him back to his people. Cletus knelt beside Shadowhawk, examining the bandages. He produced a small pouch from his coat filled with dried herbs. Cheyenne taught me a thing or two about healing. Let's see if we can fix you up. Working with deft hands, he cleansed the wound, applied a poultice and rewrapped the bandages. Shadowhawk let out a soft sigh, a moment of relief from the throbbing. "This'll help draw out infection," Cletus explained, packing up his herbs. "He'll need rest, though. Going too far too fast might kill him." Clara May bit her lip. "But we have to keep moving." She explained about the cavalry and outlaws seeking a bounty. Cletus let out a low whistle. "Seems you're in a tight spot. You keep going south along the river. For another day or so, you'll reach the territory where the Cheyenne still roam, near the big cottonwood stands. If you're lucky, you'll find his kin. If you're unlucky, you'll run into Colonel Bert's men, or some meaner folks." She thanked him and offered some biscuits, which he gratefully accepted. Before Cletus departed, he offered a final piece of advice. Travel at dawn or dusk. Avoid midday. That's when folks can spot you from miles away. He tipped his hat to Shadowhawk, said a phrase in Cheyenne that seemed to comfort him, then vanished back into the wilderness as quickly as he'd arrived. Taking Cletus's advice, Clara May decided to press onward in the pre-dawn hours. She shook Shadowhawk gently awake, helped him climb into the wagon, and urged the mule along the riverbank under the cover of darkness. The rising moon cast a faint glow enough to see the way without a lantern. Exhaustion weighed on Clara May's body. She hadn't properly rested for days, always alert for danger. Soreness settled into her bones from steering the wagon over rough terrain. Still, she refused to abandon her mission. A sense of duty, or perhaps destiny, pulled her forward. Around midnight, the mule stumbled over a rock, nearly overturning the wagon. Clara May managed to steady the reins, but the sudden jolt caused Shadowhawk to cry out in pain. She jumped down to check on him, only to feel something whiz past her ear. An arrow. Instinct kicked in, and she ducked behind the wagon wheel, heart slamming in her chest. Then a low voice called from the darkness. "Whoa, easy there. We ain't your enemy." Slowly, 3 silhouettes emerged carrying bows. By the moonlight, Clara May saw they were native men, possibly Cheyenne. She raised her hands, praying they wouldn't loose any arrows. Shadowhawk managed to lean out from the wagon, addressing them in frantic Cheyenne. The men rushed forward, lowering their weapons. One of them, tall, with braided hair and a stone-faced countenance, spoke to Shadowhawk in a torrent of words. Clara May felt relief as tension melted from their postures. It seemed they recognized him. They helped him down from the wagon, supporting him by the arms. He introduced Clara May in broken Cheyenne, and though she couldn't grasp the full conversation, the men nodded at her with respect. She caught the name Otae repeated several times, a name or a title. One of the warriors motioned for Clara May to follow. Without hesitation, she left the mule behind for a moment and accompanied them on foot. Shadowhawk leaned heavily on the tall warrior, each step visibly painful. As they moved deeper into the cottonwoods, a small clearing opened to reveal a temporary camp. A few tents, a low burning fire, and the gentle nickering of ponies tethered nearby. A woman emerged from one tent, her expression blossoming into shock and relief upon seeing Shadowhawk. She rushed forward, speaking rapidly, tears glistening in her eyes. Shadowhawk eased into her embrace. Clara May stood at the edge of the firelight, her heart swelling at the reunion she had fought so hard to achieve. Then the tall warrior approached Clara May, indicating she should sit by the fire. He offered her a blanket as the night air grew colder. Another warrior carefully examined Shadowhawk's injuries. A hush fell over the camp as they realized how close to death he had come. Clara May gazed around, uncertain of her next move. In time, The woman, likely a relative of Shadowhawk, approached with a small bowl of warm stew. She handed it to Clara May, smiling through tears. Though no words were exchanged, that smile conveyed more gratitude than any language could express. Over the next several days, Clara May found herself in an unexpected sanctuary among these Cheyenne. Word spread quickly through the small band that this white farm girl had risked her life to save Shadowhawk. Some looked on her with curiosity, others with cautious respect. Yet no one treated her unkindly. The older warriors, steeped in the struggles with the ever-encroaching settlers and cavalry, viewed her with a mix of admiration and confusion. It was rare indeed for a settler to show such mercy, risking everything to nurse a wounded warrior. Shadowhawk's condition improved steadily with the help of Cheyenne healers who had more knowledge of herbal poultices. Clara May also tended him, assisting where she could. The language barrier gradually lessened as she picked up basic phrases, and some tribe members knew a smattering of English gleaned from trade or negotiations. She learned that Shadowhawk was indeed a respected warrior and messenger, tasked with traveling between bands to coordinate peaceful solutions in the face of mounting pressure from the U.S. Army. His near-fatal gunshot wound had come from a skirmish near the Bozeman Trail, where tensions flared over gold seekers trespassing on sacred hunting grounds. One evening, the tall warrior who'd first lowered his bow introduced himself in halting English as One Bear. He'd lost 2 brothers in raids by unscrupulous vigilantes. Yet as he sat with Clara May by the campfire, he expressed a measured acceptance of her presence. "You saved Ty," he said, using Shadowhawk's Cheyenne name. "You good heart." She nodded, her eyes flickering with the fire's reflection. "I wish there was peace," she whispered, feeling the weight of centuries of conflict. He studied her face. "You tell white soldiers peace. They do not listen." Her thoughts drifted to Sergeant Price and Colonel Burt, men driven by fear or ambition, unwilling to see the humanity in those they labeled enemies. She wished she had an answer. Instead, she told One Bear about Colonel Henry Inman, a man she believed might help. He listened gravely, uncertain if any single person could shift the tide. In time, Shadowhawk gained enough strength to walk on his own. The entire camp recognized that his survival was a direct result of Clara May's intervention. He sought to honor her, but she demurred, saying she only did what anyone with a conscience would have done. Peace, however, was a fleeting notion in the Wild West. Word reached the Cheyenne camp that Colonel Burt's patrols were sweeping south, arresting or driving out any Cheyenne they encountered, peaceful or not. The tension in the camp soared. Some advocated packing up and moving further into remote territory. Others spoke of standing their ground. Shadowhawk conferred with his fellow warriors. Clara May felt uneasy, recalling how close the cavalry had come to discovering him at her home. If the soldiers found this camp, it could become a massacre. That night, One Bear caught Clara May's arm. "We ride soon," he said. "Need safe place." She realized he was asking for her advice. She mentioned the farmland near the Sweetwater, but that was too close to the cavalry's routes. The question hung in the air, how to escape Colonel Burt's dragnet. If they fled north, they risked running into more fort patrols. South, they might cross paths with roving outlaws. For the Cheyenne, there seemed no place left to go. Desperate Clara May offered a plan. "I can go to Fort Laramie," she said. "Try to speak with Colonel Inman." Though no longer in command, he had influence with the rank and file. Perhaps he could intervene before Burt's men arrived. Shadow Hawk and one bear exchanged doubtful glances. The cavalry might see Clara May as a traitor if she confessed to harboring a Cheyenne. She could be imprisoned or worse. Yet she insisted. We've come too far to fail now. After hours of debate, they agreed she would ride to Fort Laramie at first light, carrying a letter from Shadow Hawk, a statement of peaceful intent, sealed with a tribal mark. The risk was immense, but time was short. At dawn, Clara May said her farewells. Shadow Hawk pressed a beaded bracelet into her hand, a token of gratitude and trust. One bear clasped her arm in a gesture of solidarity. She mounted a spare pony they provided her, heart hammering in her chest, and set out toward the fort miles away. The journey took 2 days, skirting known patrol routes. Clara May traveled mostly by night, resting in hidden gullies during the day. Exhaustion weighed on her, but an unshakable determination pushed her onward. She pictured the worried faces of her parents waiting anxiously for her return. She also pictured the kind faces of the Cheyenne families who had welcomed her. Finally, she approached the sturdy wooden walls of Fort Laramie. Nervous cavalry sentries eyed her warily as she explained she had urgent news for Colonel Henry Inman. Though Inman was semi-retired, he maintained an advisory role. After some convincing, they led her inside. The fort bustled with soldiers, supply wagons, and the clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Clara May's heart raced. What if Colonel Inman refused to help? She was escorted to a small office where the colonel sat, older now, his once raven hair streaked with grey. He looked up over a pair of reading glasses, eyebrows raised at the sight of a teenage girl in dusty clothes. "Miss Dawson, is it?" he said, reading her name from a note the guard had handed him. "What brings you to Fort Laramie?" Her voice trembled. She told him everything. Finding the wounded warrior, nursing him back to health, the near encounters with Colonel Burt's patrol, and the impending threat to Shadow Hawk's band. She ended by placing the sealed letter on his desk. Shadow Hawk, the Cheyenne warrior, wrote this. He wants peace. Please, sir, I beg you to read it, then speak to your men. Colonel Burt's patrol is marching south. They'll find that camp, and lives will be lost. Colonel Inman's weathered face grew more somber with each passing detail. He broke the seal, scanning the letter's contents with narrowed eyes. At last he set it aside, letting out a weary sigh. I've known many Cheyenne to be men of honor. The conflicts we face now are a tragedy. If what you say is true, Burt's overstepping his authority. But I cannot simply order him to stand down. My influence is limited. Tears sprang to Clara May's eyes. There must be something you can do. More people will die. He studied her admiration flickering in his expression. Your courage is remarkable, young lady. He reached for a quill and parchment. I'll write a dispatch to Colonel Burt, instructing him to halt any offensive action until we can hold a proper council. Perhaps that will buy enough time. Hope soared within Clara May. Thank you, she whispered. Colonel Inman sent a messenger immediately and arranged for Clara May to rest overnight in the fort's guest quarters. She fell into bed drained by the ordeal, but relieved that help was on its way if the message reached Burt in time. In the morning, Colonel Inman offered Clara May an escort back south, but the young girl sensed time was too short for a full cavalry detachment to muster. Instead, she urged that the messenger ride ahead while she followed more swiftly on her own. Inman reluctantly agreed, providing her with fresh supplies, a better horse, and a heartfelt plea to be cautious. As she rode out from the fort, the crisp air lashed her face, but hope burned bright in her chest. She prayed Colonel Burt would heed Inman's request. If Bert ignored it, her mission would be in vain. Racing across the plains, she covered in hours distances that had taken days before. The new horse, a sturdy bay gelding, responded eagerly to her signals. She pressed on, only stopping when her mount needed water. Memories of the Cheyenne camp propelled her forward, the children playing by the riverbank, the elders quietly weaving blankets, the worry etched in one bear's eyes. She had to reach them. On the second day of her return, she spotted a column of dust rising on the horizon. Soldiers. Her heart hammered. She veered west, urging the horse into a gully to remain unseen. From a vantage point behind a rise, she peered through swirling dust to see what looked like dozens of cavalry troopers, Colonel Bert's men, heading south, exactly where the Cheyenne were camped. Without hesitation, Clara May urged her horse to skirt the column, desperate to reach the camp before them. She rode well into the evening, not pausing to light a fire, and the darkness soon enveloped her. When dawn broke, she crested a hillside overlooking the cottonwoods. A sight of horror unfolded below Bert's cavalry had already arrived. They faced a line of Cheyenne warriors near the edge of the camp. Women and children huddled behind them. The air was electric with tension rifles and bows drawn each side, waiting for a spark that could ignite chaos. Clara May's stomach twisted in knots. She spurred her horse downhill, waving her arms frantically, ignoring the startled shouts of soldiers. One bear and Shadow Hawk recognized her immediately, relief mingling with alarm on their faces. Colonel Bert, mounted at the center of his line, whipped around, anger flashing in his steely gaze. "Stop there," he barked, pointing his pistol in the air. "Who are you?" She pulled her horse to a halt, chest heaving. "Clara May Dawson. I have a message from Colonel Henry Inman. He orders you to stand down." The troopers eyed her with confusion. Some lowered their rifles, uncertain. Colonel Bert glowered. "I take my orders from my superiors, not from some girl." Clara May wrestled in her saddle for the letter, brandishing it for him to see. "Colonel Inman demands a council, not a slaughter. If you refuse, you'll face court-martial for disobeying direct communication from a higher-ranking authority." Murmurs rippled among the cavalry. Bert's jaw clenched. His thirst for glory, or perhaps fear of losing face, battled with the knowledge that defying Inman's dispatch could indeed ruin him. Meanwhile, the Cheyenne warriors stood ready, arrows nocked, waiting only for a signal. The morning sunlight spilled across the plains, painting the scene in vivid gold. Shadow Hawk, his wound still bandaged, stepped forward on trembling legs. He raised one hand, high palm open, an unmistakable sign of peace. For a tense moment it seemed Bert might order an attack anyway. But seeing the resolve in his men wavering, he growled under his breath and snatched the letter from Clara May's hand. He read it quickly, color rising in his cheeks. Finally he barked an order. "Troopers, lower your weapons." A collective exhale swept the field. Cheyenne warriors eased their bows down while a few cavalrymen removed their fingers from triggers. Clara May slid off her horse legs, shaking. She walked over to Shadow Hawk, tears wetting her cheeks. He mustered a small smile, placing a hand on her shoulder. For now at least bloodshed was averted. In the uneasy truce that followed, Colonel Bert agreed to stand by until a formal council could be arranged. Colonel Inman himself rode south within days, accompanied by several representatives familiar with treaty negotiations. A large meeting was convened near the very cottonwoods where Clara May had found respite. Tents were pitched in a circle with Cheyenne chiefs, including Shadow Hawk's elders, joining cavalry officers and interpreters around a central fire. Though tensions still simmered, the presence of Colonel Inman, who truly sought compromise, diffused some of the hostility. Clara May was invited to sit on the periphery, a silent observer to history in the making. She listened to hours of careful, sometimes heated debate about boundaries, treaties, and shared land use. The Cheyenne demanded respect for their rights, while the army insisted on safe passage for settlers. In the end, a fragile accord was reached, a promise that no further hostilities would be launched without negotiation, and that the Cheyenne camp could remain unmolested for a designated time. It was not a permanent solution, but it was a reprieve from further violence. Clara May's actions had bought them that precious time. In the haze of the early morning, as the sun's first rays lit the eastern sky, something extraordinary happened. The Cheyenne warriors gathered near Clara May's tent, perhaps a dozen strong, all wearing their finest regalia. One bear, stone-faced as ever, beckoned her to rise. Confused, she stood smoothing her rumpled skirt. Shadowhawk, dressed in a ceremonial breastplate, stepped forward. With deliberate solemnity, he raised a painted lance adorned with eagle feathers. He spoke in Cheyenne first, then haltingly in English. "We honor the one who saved a life, who braved the plains, who faced men with guns to protect us. This is our sister Clara May Dawson." He thrust the lance into the ground at her feet, a symbolic gesture of respect and gratitude. A chorus of chanting and the rhythmic beat of a hand drum followed, echoing through the still morning air. The cavalry soldiers, Colonel Inman, and even Colonel Burt, watched from a respectful distance, some with awe, some with discomfort. Tears streamed down Clara May's face as she realized the gravity of what they were doing. This was a sacred acknowledgement of her bravery, a recognition she never sought, but which was bestowed upon her nonetheless. She placed one hand on her heart and bowed her head. One bear solemnly said, "At dawn, we stand with you, sister." In that moment, the first orange and pink streaks of sunlight broke over the horizon, illuminating the entire gathering in soft radiance. Despite the uncertain future, the air bristled with a shared reverence, a unity bridging two worlds that had long been at odds. The council fires still smoldered in the cottonwoods when Clara May mounted her horse once more. Though Colonel Inman had kindly offered her an escort home, she gently declined her heart, telling her this journey, like every step that led to it, was hers to complete alone. Before she left, Shadowhawk approached her quietly, his dark eyes reflecting both sorrow and strength. He pressed into her palm a second beaded band nearly identical to the first. "To remember," he said softly. "Two paths, one spirit." She blinked back tears, her voice caught in her throat. Words felt too small for the moment, so she simply nodded, curling her fingers around the precious gift. She rode into the sunrise, the sky tinged with amber from the storm-cleansed earth. The vast plains stretched out like an old friend, still wild, but no longer unknown. The prairie grasses whispered in the wind, and for the first time she felt truly a part of them, not just a farm girl, but a witness to history, a thread in a deeper fabric of two worlds learning to meet. By the time she reached the edge of Dawson land, her heart beat with both longing and weight. The modest homestead came into view, smoke curling from the chimney. She hadn't realized how much she missed the scent of Lucy's bread or the creak of the porch swing. Suddenly, the front door burst open. Lucy sprinted into the yard, apron fluttering in the breeze, her face a flood of relief and joy. She wrapped her daughter in a fierce embrace, tears soaking Clara May's shoulder. Thank the Lord, she murmured over and over. Samuel followed slower, but just as moved. His weathered face broke into a wide smile as he took off his hat and pulled Clara May into a long, steady hug. "You came back different," he said, pride thick in his voice, like someone who's seen more than her years. That evening by firelight, Clara May told them everything about the near capture by soldiers the night rides under the stars. The Cheyenne's hidden camp and the sacred dawn when she was named their sister. Lucy wept. Samuel sat in quiet awe. From that day on, Clara May was no longer seen as just a girl from Sweetwater. Rumors swirled, some dismissed her tale as fantasy, others whispered of her courage with reverence. But to her parents and to the Cheyenne whose lives had been spared, there was no doubt Clara May Dawson had bridged two worlds through sheer humanity. And on every morning that followed, when the sun crested the eastern hills, Clara May would glance at the horizon and remember a moment of peace earned by heart grit and a dawn filled with honor. Thus ends the gripping tale of a brave farm girl who dared to save a mysterious Cheyenne warrior and forever changed the fate of their small corner of the Wild West. By her compassion, Clara May Dawson not only rescued a life, she ignited hope that understanding could bridge the fiercest divides. Today, as we recall her journey through dusty plains and tense standoffs, we remember that unity often begins with a single act of kindness. Call to action. If you found inspiration in Clara May's courage and the bond she forged with the Cheyenne, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more tales of daring and devotion to life. Spread the word and keep the spirit of empathy alive in your own journey. There's always another frontier waiting to be explored and another story to be told.